Okay, so the next motif is after vertical banner, the banner or banners. The next motif is glossy train. Now, trains are something that are they have a very interesting way of. It's a very interesting mode of transportation. The way they are, I think there's a sense of romance in the concept of a train, and with this, imagining a glossy, a beautiful new train, there's an interesting way that you can symbolically perceive this. Maybe it's a beginning of a beautiful journey. Maybe it's a beginning of a nice adventure, and with this train, there's a sense of romance with it. So there's something very beautiful about um, you can think of it in that way, that is symbolically think of it in the sense of a journey, and you can perceive it another way. You can just perceive it in the sense of the beauty of how beautiful trains look, and how this train might look, what sort of colors it might use, and yeah, you can imagine the surroundings of it, the surrounding being on that. Imagine the architecture of the platform. Imagine the architecture of the entire um, the en- uh, the entire structure of it. Think of it in You can think of it in that sense, and in that sense, sort of think of the aesthetic of it. You can think of it in just that sense. You can also imagine another meaning of that concept of a romantic journey in that sense, or a romantic adventure. Not necessarily in, like I said, a literal sense. You can think of it in that way. But yeah, so that's a. I thought it was an interesting and uh, yeah, a sort of a nice motive to think of it in that way. And yeah, along with this train, you can also imagine certain of the other structures that are associated with trains. Imagine this beautiful glossy train on uh, on a nice set of curved tracks, and the way the train sort of moves with it, in the sense that it curves, and all the different sections of the train, the way they curve and move along it, has a certain sense of beauty in it. You can imagine this train moving on a bridge. Imagine the architecture of the bridge, and the way this looks, and the surroundings of it. You can think of it imagine it in many different ways. And yeah, so I think it's an interesting motive. And yeah, so the next one is okay. This is a sort of more okay. It is okay, and you might not necessarily you might not necessarily identify as an old soul, or it's just a motive that I sort of thought was maybe kind of interesting. So you don't necessarily, it's not necessarily that you have to be that way, or you have to be an old soul or something like that. It's not a necessity. So the next motive is old soul, and sort of with going with the idea of an old soul is forever youthful. So with you can think of it in terms of meanings. You can think of an old soul as there is that wisdom in it. Uh, there is that calmness and intelligence. Wisdom, not wisdom and intelligence are different concepts, but wisdom in it. You can think of it in the sense of having a very soft personality, and going with the old soul. The idea of being forever youthful is to have that to have that playfulness, to have that energy, to have that, yeah, that playfulness, and in the sense that interacting with others, there's that happiness in it. You can think of it in the sense that you never want to grow up. There's, yeah, the concept of never growing up, and um, being happy in the sense that children are happy. They're just happy. So you can think of it in that sense. I thought there was like an interesting sort of duality here of an old soul and forever youthful. So I thought that was an interesting way. You can think of it in different ways, like I said. So yeah. So the next motive was is a hopeless romantic. I guess you can, like I said, this is a more of a, you might or might not want to identify with this. So I thought it's a beautiful concept to be a hopeless romantic. As I don't know, as silly as it might sound, I think there's something very beautiful about it. And so I thought I might include it in this as well. So, but yeah, a very nice, a very hopeful, and even though it says hopeless romantic, I think there's very something very hopeful about it. And yeah, I think it's a very amazing thing to be a hopeless romantic. Okay, so the next motive, again, now we're sort of deviating from the previous ones, is this is a more abstract one, and this is imagine a burst of light. So with this motive of a burst of light, or burst of light, okay, in a more, can you think of this as, again, like I previously talked about in different sort of motives, is the concept of an expansion, a burst of light. What does that mean? Does that mean a very quick and rapid sort of um, enlightenment, could you say? A very um, or making very rapid uh, movement, and uh, yeah, making, I, I hope I'm making sense here when I'm saying this, is the concept is of a very rapid expansion of light, in the way that there is just something amazing just happening at a very rapid, in a very rapid sense, and what's expanding is light. So using the symbolism, or using certain of the concepts that I talked about with light, you can think of it in different ways. Like I said, this is a more abstract one, so this can be thought of in terms of more abstract ideas. So yeah, so on to the next motive. The next motive is dazzling crystals. So a very in a way, these are, it would be a beautiful sight to imagine this visually. So imagine all these different crystals with all sorts of different colors. They have the way they refract light, the way they reflect light, the way they sort of, their lights interact with each other, the way there is that interaction of light with them. They create that sharpness. There is that color, there's that sharpness of color. There is so many, well, I'm not being that articulate right now. Anyway, I'm going to carry on. Anyway, so yeah, there is a very nice aesthetic of it. Like I previously talked about with the motif of a treasure chest. This is sort of similar to this. Maybe there is the concept of uh, this beauty being, there's that concept of jewels, and with jewels and lighting, all the ways these lights interact with them, there is that dazzling beauty in it. So yeah, can you think of this in different ways? Maybe because we're talking about sort of light previously, and this crystals are something that interact with light, you can you can symbolically think of these crystals as something that amplifies, something that interact with light. And I think in another time I can really get into the metaphysics of this, of light and crystals, and the interaction of light and various aspects of it. So it would be an interesting concept, but I think if you just look at it in terms of aesthetics for now, I think it there's a very nice aesthetic quality to it, and in just the way it just directly looks to us and it speaks to us. So, and you can imagine the transparencies and all the various colors. Imagine some of the lighter colors versus some of the more intense colors. as in the intensity of the color itself, versus certain can be mostly um, transparent with very little color in them. And you can think of it in how they look all next to each other and interact, and the harmonies that you can create with them. And like I said, with the concept of them, the interactions between light and these crystals, you can think of it in the way that they refract. And yeah, like I talked about with the previous thing. So there's an interesting sort of symbolic meaning that you can think of from this. Well, I'm not being very eloquent right now. I don't know if I should. Okay. Okay, so I'll continue on afterwards. Okay.